Good morning to all. Today's lesson is reading comprehension. So before going into this lecture, this lesson, let us see the objectives of this lesson. The objectives are promoting active reading, that is close reading, intensive reading. The second objective is promoting speed reading or skimming, that is reading for information, specific information. Reading for that specific data called speed skimming or speed reading. Promoting intensive or micro comprehension. What is micro comprehension? Understanding of individual words, their denotations and connotations, their figurative meanings and their literal meanings, and the other sorts of meanings of the words. Next, promoting extensive or macro comprehension. What is macro comprehension? Understanding the main and subordinate ideas and their relation to one another. So this is understanding the main idea, the major concept in that passage, and the subordinate ancillary ideas related to that concept we are going to study. Let us see the introduction of this reading comprehension. Introduction of this reading comprehension. There is a basic difference there is a basic difference between reading and listening. There is a difference between reading and listening. In listening, we have the speaker in front of us and have direct contact with him. In listening, we have a speaker before us and we will have direct contact with that speaker. In case of any doubt about what he says, we can question him and get our doubts clarified, his views elaborated, etc. In case of any doubt, question that speaker and we can clarify our doubt. Moreover, his body communication, that is the way he speaks, his tone, the emphasis he gives to certain words and ideas, etc., make us comprehend his views. We can clarify our doubts with the speaker because the speaker is present before us. At the same time, the body language of that speaker clarifies some of our doubts. The way he pronounces words, his facial expressions and body language, etc. But in reading, we do not speak or to the writer directly. In reading comprehension, we cannot speak with the writer. That is the major setback. Of course, in the written message also, there are the elements of tone, emphasis, etc. But these are subtle in writing and more explicit in speech. In writing also, we have tone and we have tenor of that writing, but this is more expressive in reading comprehension, in listening comprehension. So when we read something, in order to understand the full meaning, it is important for the reader to engage in a mental dialogue with the writer. So it is very important to engage in a mental dialogue with the writer. This dialogue, often called active reading, is the key to increasing comprehension. So this mental dialogue with the writer when we read is very important to comprehend the passage. Improving our concentration, it also improves our concentration, overcoming boredom and stimulating activity, according to many reading experts. So these things, when we engage with a reading comprehension passage mentally, we can understand the passage fully. The level of comprehension required is itself decided by the purpose for which the reading is done. So here the purpose is very important. Why the reading is done? Is it done for pleasure? Is it done for some specific information? Is it done casually? All these things come into play. We may read different types of materials for different purposes. We read the newspapers and magazines to gather information and knowledge. For reading newspapers and magazines is different. We read novels and pieces of literature for pleasure and enjoyment. Pleasure and enjoyment, we read novels, fiction, etc. And on the other hand, a student reading the same novels and works of literature for an examination has to do so different. If a student of literature is reading a novel, he has to examine the novel from the different perspective, because he has to take the examination and he has to present his views in the examination. And a lawyer reading his brief, or an official reading a report, or an expert reading a book on his subject has to read with concentration and carefulness. So the lawyers who read their documents, they read for different purposes. Any misunderstanding of the text in the last two cases may lead to serious consequences. Any misunderstanding of the text leads to confusion and serious consequences. When we read for pleasure and enjoyment, concentrated and careful reading is not necessary. So when a reader is reading a book for pleasure and enjoyment, just to pass his time, the focus and the micro reading is not, intensive reading is not necessary. We may skim over the text and even skip some paragraphs or pages. Just he can skim the lines and he can skip certain paragraphs which elaborate. When we read for information or knowledge in general, not for a serious purpose, a total comprehension is done. Total comprehension is enough, and so a detailed study may not be necessary. So detailed study is not necessary when we do it just for pleasure. For example, in a newspaper, when we read the headline like "They only responded to queries PM, BJP expels so and so to die in Mishap," etc., we get general information and often we are not tempted to read deeper. In such cases, we get the import of the news item just by reading the caption. So we don't go deep into the news item because we know what is the body of the news. But in some cases, like forest minister stripped of portfolio, we become curious to know what portfolio has been taken away from him and why. So some news items require intensive reading. Depending upon the purpose of reading, is divided into number one, speed reading or skimming. That is the number one. Number two, general reading, 400 to 500 words per minute, or accelerating. So that is the second stage. Careful reading, average reading speed is 250 words per minute. That is the third stage. And we read the report, but even then it is what is known as a cursory glance. However, in the case of serious reading, every word, every sentence, their structures, their combinations, their tones become important. When we read intensive purpose, every word matters, every phrase, every idiom, every structure matters. At the very basic level, one usual method of picking out the important points is to underline them in the body of the message or mark them with a line or lines in the margin. So one basic method is underlining the important sentences so that later they can be visited easily, they can be traced easily. In the modern days, we use the highlighting pens of different colors and smear the color over the important words and figures. So we have highlighters also. With that also, we can highlight the important sentences. For example, when we get an invitation for an important function, we underline the date, the time, the venue of the function with the red ink to facilitate our memory. So comprehension is the very purpose of all reading. Understanding is the very purpose of all reading. Even when you read for pleasure, there can be no pleasure without understanding what is read. Even if you read for pleasure, there is no pleasure. Uh, why you are reading? What is the purpose of reading? But this comprehension itself is of two levels: intensive or micro comprehension, extensive or macro comprehension. While intensive or micro comprehension involves the understanding of individual words, their denotations and connotations, extensive or macro comprehension refers to the understanding of the main subordinate ideas and their relation to one another. So this is the introductory part of this lesson. Now I read the lesson, the passage, then we will discuss the question and answer. The Indian election. The Indian election of 1952 was the most momentous event in the history of the world. This is the first general election of independent India. So this election is the momentous event in the history of the world. The entire world, this conduct of the 1952 general election is a mega event, momentous event. Never before in any time or clime were elections held on such a gigantic scale. Elections were not held on such a large scale anywhere in the world before 1950. So at the time, elections in India held at a gigantic, a large scale. India, with a population of 350 million, went to worship at the altar of democracy. India uh, went for 1952 general elections, and this is the occasion for celebrating democracy, installing democracy in independent India. So almost 350 million people of India uh, worship democracy. The British, when they quit the country, bag and baggage, bequeathed administrative authority to Congress, which was the largest political party in the country. So when the British left India, they handed over the administration to the Indian National Congress, because at that time, Indian National Congress was the largest uh, political party. The British government handed over the general administration to the Indian National Congress. But strictly speaking, had no representative character. But Indian National Congress is a political party, but it didn't have any representative character. It is just a political party. It was not elected by the majority of the people. but it enjoyed the popularity of the people. It could at best form an interim government. So, Indian National Congress formed an interim government. Interim means for the time being, it formed the government and looked after the general administration and day-to-day affairs of the country. Consequently, when the critics leveled scathing criticism against the government, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru felt that the nation must go to the polls at the earliest. So the other political parties started criticizing National Congress for being in the interim government. And it leveled criticism against Congress government and it demanded to conduct general elections immediately so that the people can participate in the democratic electioneering process and elect popular government to govern the country. So, Jawaharlal Nehru, what he did, it is a difficult task, he said, but we have got to go through it. Nehru said that conducting elections in India is a very, very difficult task because of its size, because of the number of voters, because of vastness of the country, and because of not having experience previously. There were innumerable administrative difficulties. There were many administrative difficulties in this process. First, India is not a country but rather a continent stretching from Kashmir to Kanyakumari and from Ahmedabad to Aizawl. So India is not a country, but it is a continent, because it stretched from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, from north to south, and Ahmedabad to Aizawl, from west to east. And secondly, to prepare electoral rolls for teeming millions, staggering the imagination. So preparing electoral rolls for millions of voters is a Herculean task. Thirdly, an overwhelming majority of people being illiterate were innocent of democratic convention. So majority of the people in India are illiterate at that time and they do not know democratic conventions involved in this process. Fourthly, there was the problem of stamping out corruption in machinery of electioneering. Fourth problem is the corruption in the government machinery, particularly electioneering machinery. People who involved uh, election electoral process. The government tackled all these handicaps with courage and confidence. Though the government is wise, inexperienced, but it tackled with confidence and courage. The Election Commission was appointed immediately after the attainment of independence. So immediately, Election Commission was appointed, and it took nearly 4 years to complete the electoral rolls. It took nearly 4 years to complete the electoral rolls. So it was a very long time and very a difficult process. The candidates were assigned symbols for the convenience of the illiterate citizens. The candidates were given symbols because most of the voters were illiterate. They cannot read. That's why they were given symbols. And Pandit Nehru issued a stern warning to the electoral officials that they must keep up the highest standards of integrity and uprightness. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru warned the people, officers involved in electoral process not to resort to corruption, but to maintain integrity and to maintain the uprightness. All electioneering propaganda was banned on the eve of polling. So all propaganda was banned and canvassing was banned before polling. The excellent effort of the government bore fine fruit. The efforts of the Indian government have given a good result, and everything went off slowly, steadily, and smoothly. Everything was in proper place, and everything was done smoothly and successfully. Indian elections received the highest prize in the world press. Indian elections were viewed uh, with high regard in the world press. The world press appreciated uh, the, the conduct of Indian general elections in 1950. Full freedom of speech was guaranteed to candidates in the election. In the election, while canvassing, the candidates were given full freedom of expression. They canvassed without any restrictions, with full freedom. And it was beyond doubt the greatest democratic experimentation in the world. So there is no doubt that this is the greatest experiment in the world politics, particularly in democratic electioneering, electoral politics. And as many as 20 parties contested the election. Almost 20 parties participated in this election. The most important among them were the Congress. The important political parties are Congress, the Jansangh, the Communists, the Socialists, and the Kisan Mazdoor Praja Party, and the Hindu Mahasabha, and the Forward Bloc. These are all the political parties. And the communists showed some success in the south but failed to capture enough seats to form a government. The communists could show their presence in southern India, but they could not win uh, majority of the seats. They won a few seats in southern India. Their presence was almost nil in northern India. And the Jansangh, contrary to all expectations, showed poor results. The Jansangh showed poor results, a dismal performance, and it could not win even a single seat in the first general election. The socialists saw their dreams ending in smoke. The socialist parties are also have given dismal performance. They could not win seats. The forward bloc almost blotted itself out. The forward bloc almost was decimated by the Congress. As a result of the elections, only the PEPSU had the honor of forming a non-Congress ministry under Akali leadership. So this non-Congress regional party, Punjab province, Punjab state, Punjab province, it won the majority of the elections and it formed government in Punjab. And this is the only non-Congress party, non-Congress inside India. The people responded enthusiastically. There were delightful scenes in the polling station. The people participated in this election very enthusiastically, out of interest, and there was the festive atmosphere in every polling stations. Even the aged and the sick were carried on stretchers to cast their votes. Even the sick people, old people, aged people were carried into the polling booths on stretchers, cast their vote. Some ignorant voters prayed before the ballot boxes. some voters worshipped the ballot boxes because of their ignorance, because of their innocence. They worshipped the ballot box, mistaking the real purpose of the Congress symbol. And one old woman was good enough to bring hay for the bulls. So, in the 1952 first general elections, the symbol of Congress party was bulls. So, for bulls, an old woman brought some dried grass or hay. This it was the extent of ignorance or admiration or hero worship for the Congress government in the first general election. Now, let us see the questions. And which general election is described in this passage? The answer is the general election for the state assemblies in 1952. This is the answer. Second question, was this election to parliament or the state assembly? Give the reason for your answers. It was to the state assembly. The sentence, it was the Congress that came out with flying colors in all the provinces shows this. So the general election was for state assemblies, and it was the Congress that came out with flying colors in all the provinces. Sentence shows the elections were held for assembly seats. Quote one sentence from the passage which brings out the greatness of the election. The answer is never before in any time or clime were elections held on such a gigantic scale. So it shows that greatness of first uh, elections in India. So these elections were held on gigantic scale, on the large scale, and never before in any time or clime were elections held on such a gigantic scale. Fourth question, what was the reason for the British handing over the administration to the Congress? The answer is it was the largest political party in the country at the time. It was the largest political party in the country at the time. Fifth, what according to the author was the defect about the Congress running the government? The Congress had no representative character. This is the defect because formed interim government and it enjoyed the goodwill of the British government. That's why the British government handed over the transferred the powers to Indian National Congress because of its presence in the country at a large extent. Then, sixth question. What was the immediate cause for the government ordering the elections? The critics leveled strong criticism against the government. That's why they conducted the election. What were the four great difficulties in holding the elections? The huge size of the country, preparing the electoral rolls for millions of people, the vast illiteracy of majority of the people, and corruption in the machinery of electioneering. These were the four great difficulties. The huge size of the country, preparing the electoral rolls for millions of people, and the vast illiteracy of the majority of the people, the corruption in the machinery of the electioneering. These were the four great difficulties faced by the then interim government. Over the four great difficulties in holding the elections solved. The Election Commission was appointed immediately after independence. This is the first. In 4 years, the electoral rolls were prepared. To help the illiterate people, symbols were allotted to the principal parties, and Prime Minister issued a strong warning to the electoral officials to maintain the highest standard of honesty. Thus, the four problems were solved. The first is appointing the Election Commission of India. Number two is preparing electoral rolls, and number next is preparing, giving symbols to the political parties so that uh, the illiterate voters can easily identify, easily cast their vote with the help of the symbol. And last one is giving a strong warning to the corrupt officials. So all these problems were successfully overcome. How many parties contested the election and how many were successful in coming to power? 20 parties contested the election and only 2 were successful in coming to power. One is the Congress, the other is IPSO. How can we understand the enthusiasm of the people in the election? Even the old and sick people were brought to polling stations on stretchers, and this shows the people's enthusiasm. So these are the short questions. Intensive, micro questions, micro comprehension questions. Let us come to intensive questions, micro comprehension questions. Previously, we have answered macro comprehension questions. Give the meanings of the following words in the context of the passage: momentous, chronicles, bequeath, scathing, innumerable. So, momentous means uh, in momentous means very significant. Chronicles means history or records. Bequeath mean handover. Scathing means strong, biting. Innumerable means a very large number, countless. Second, choose from the passage the words having the following meanings: a very large, innumerable, deal with, tackle, given or allotted, assigned, honesty, integrity, dried grass, hay, Hay. Next, give the meanings of the following phrases and idioms and use them in sentences of your own. To blot oneself out, it means to eliminate or destroy oneself. To come out with flying colors means to do something very successfully, creditably, beyond doubt means undoubtedly. Keep up, to maintain. To keep up means to maintain. To stamp out means to destroy, to remove completely. Explain the metaphor in the sentence: India went to worship at altar of democracy. The meaning of this sentence is democracy is described as goddess and the voters are compared to the devotees of the goddess. Democracy is a goddess and voters were worshippers or are worshippers. Can you guess in which state Pepsu won the election? It won the election in Punjab. The words Akali leadership reveals this. It won the elections in Punjab province because the Akali, the word Akali refers to that province. That province. Next, author says that an overwhelming majority of people being illiterate were innocent of any democratic conventions. Can you suggest a word better than innocent in this sentence? Other word is ignorant. What was the symbol of the Congress in the 1952 election? That is bulls. Bulls. Give two examples of humor found in this passage. One is some people prayed before the ballot boxes. That is one funny example, humorous examples. The second is an old woman brought hay for the bull. An old woman brought dried grass for the bulls. The symbol represented by the Congress party. Such was the level of ignorance or innocence. Ninth question. The chronicles of the world do not offer any other parallel. Rewrite the sentence beginning with we cannot. We cannot find any other parallel to it in the chronicles of the world. We cannot find any other example to it in the chronicles of the world. Why was the election of 1952 was successful? So it was successful. Why was the elections were successful? Because the government tackled all difficulties with courage and confidence. The government solved all problems with courage and confidence. Now let us come to the second paragraph. First, I read the paragraph. This is somewhat difficult paragraph. Listen to it attentively. Then we can answer the questions. All great thinkers live and move on a high plane of thought. All great thinkers live on higher order, higher level of thought. It is only there they can breathe freely. They enjoy on the higher plane. So they cannot come down to lower plane. They feel some kind of suffocation at the lower plane. It is only in contact with spirits like themselves they can live harmoniously and attain that serenity which comes from ideal companionship. Of course, the people, the great thinkers, they enjoy the company of other great thinkers. They were stimulated by the other great thinkers. Otherwise, ordinary people, ordinary things do not stimulate them. The studies of all great thinkers must range along the highest altitudes of human thought. All the great thinkers live at the highest altitudes of thought. I cannot remember the name of any illuminative genius who did not drink his inspiration from the fountains of ancient Greek or Hebrew writers. All the great thinkers were influenced by the ancient Greek works, literary works, and Hebrew writers, the language spoken by Jews. Then are such among the moderns as were pupils in the ancient thought and in turn became masters in their own. So the moderns also took inspiration from this people. I have always thought that the strongest argument in favor of the Baconian theory was that no man, however indubitable his genius, could have written the plays and sonnets that have come down to us under Shakespeare's name, who had not the liberal education of Bacon. Shakespeare is an exception, and he did not study uh, highly, but he produced universal classical plays that appeal to generations of people, though he did not have that Baconian scholarship. And how this habit of intercourse with the gods make one impatient of mere men. The magnificent ideals that have ever haunted the human mind and given us our highest proofs of future immortality by reason of the impossibility of their fulfillment here are splintered into atoms by contact with life's realities. So these people who live at the plane of thought, when they encounter the harsh realities of life, they were shattered, and all their utopian ideals, ideology, principles were disturbed. Then, hence, comes our sublime discontent. That's why we feel dissatisfaction because our ideals are high, but the reality is different. Then you will notice that your first sensation after reading a great book is one of melancholy and dissatisfaction. After reading a great book, you feel melancholy and dissatisfaction because in that book there could be an utopia and the best world, the perfect world. After finishing that book, you come into the reality and you are completely disappointed and become sad. The ideas, sentiments, expressions are so far beyond those of ordinary working life that you cannot turn aside from one to the other without an acute sensation and consciousness of the contrast. So you feel this uh, huge gap between your ideals and the reality. And the principles are so lofty, so superhuman that it is a positive pain. If once you become imbued with them, to come down and mix in the valid surroundings of ordinary humanity. So it is very difficult to come down to the common plane and mix with the masses common people after living for such a long time at the high plane of then it may be a spiritual or intellectual pride that is engendered on the high plane, intellectual life. But whatever it is, it becomes inevitable. So you have to come into the practical life. You have to face the practical life. But whatever it is, it becomes inevitable. And habitual meditation on the vast problems that underline human life and are knit human destinies, thoughts of immortality, of the of the littleness of mere man, of the greatness of man's soul, of the splendors of the universe that are invisible to the ordinary traffickers in the street, as the vastness of Saint Peter is to the spider that views her web in the corner of the door. These things do not fit men to understand the average human being or tolerate with patience the sordid wretchedness of the regenerate masses. It is easy to understand, therefore, why such thinkers fly to the solitude of their own thought and the silent companionship of the mortals and if they care to present their views in prose or verse to the world. These views take the somber and melancholy setting from the pale cast of thought in which they were engendered. So this is the passage. Now, let us see questions. On what plane must great thinkers live and move? Great thinkers must live and move on high plane of thought, on a high plane of thought. Second, is a liberal education necessary to produce great literature? No. A liberal education is not necessary to produce great literature. The shining example was Shakespeare and his works. He was not highly educated, but he produced sublime masterpieces uh, during his period. And those masterpieces enjoyed the popularity of the people across the countries. Why does the reading of a great book, according to the author, make one melancholy and disappointed? The ideas, sentiments, and expressions in a great book are quite beyond those of ordinary working life, with the result that the reader becomes conscious of the contrast and grows melancholy and disappointed. Because of the gap between his utopian world and the real world, uh, so the great thinkers feel sad and lonely because of this huge gap or contrast between uh, what they think, what they perceive, and what they see, what they have to live in. What are the things that make it hard to understand the average human being? A habitual meditation on the vast problems that underlie human life, thought of immortality, of the littleness of mere man, of the greatness of man's soul, of the splendors of the universe that are invisible to the ordinary traffickers in the street. These things make it hard to understand the average human being. So the average human beings are engaged with the day-to-day problems of life, but noble thinkers, great thinkers, they are engaged with the higher order problems, and those issues cannot be comprehended by the common. The beautiful passage, uh, the reading comprehension, second lecture. Thank you.